Hello everyone, Ron again, and in this video we're going to talk about sidechain compression. Not to be confused with other forms of compression like parallel compression, which is hilariously called New York compression. And I said that just to mention that fact because I find it funny enough that it is worthy of a mention, honorable mention in a different video. It's really hilarious. Like parallel compression is associated with New York. Like New York has Thames and they have like ear and they have parallel compression that comes from New York too. That's really funny. Anyway, so let's get into what sidechain compression is. Now regular compression, as we discussed in the vocal compression video, is when you cause a signal to duck. And actually, let me clean this. There's a lot going on here. Too much. So compression is when a signal reaches some threshold and you want to make the signal reduce in gain if it reaches that threshold at some speed and for some duration of time and also some amount. I'm not going to recap it too much because I explained it already, but you can watch that video to get a better understanding if you're confused. So you want to reduce the volume of a signal, right? But what if you want to just reduce the volume of a signal when another signal plays? For example, you have a sub bass playing and the kick is taking up the same frequencies. They will both be in the low range somewhere around here. Therefore, you don't want to produce mud in the low end, meaning that they will interfere with each other and it'll be harder to hear either of them distinctly. So the solution to that, because you have a finite amount of mixing space, if you will, like you can only have so many things in the same area and all of them be heard, is for one of them to duck while the other one plays. And that's what the purpose of sidechain compression is. So effectively, in that example I just gave, every time the kick played, the other signal would duck that is interfering with it. And that's how you can make a kick stand out amongst the bass without them interfering with each other. There are other ways too, like you could change the timing and make them vary slightly so that the transient happens and the bass kicks in a little bit later. That's a technique I've used in the past that I learned from research, but maybe I'll explore that in another video. We'll see. But this one's about sidechain compression, so I'm going to get into that. Let's look at the mixer track. I have another preset I created, which is routed to these two reverbs. And so it's going to play in those two reverbs at some point in the future when I hit a note. But if you look here, it's sidechained to this one. And that means that the information from the signal is going in, but no audio is going in. So the fruity limiter that you see is set to sidechain mode. Therefore, when I play this sound, it will pass through the reverb and reverb will begin to happen. And because the reverb has a somewhat long tail, it's almost 3 seconds long, the reverb will continue to happen because the reverb is routed so it goes to the master track. But what if I play this sound again? I don't want it to be obscured by this reverb that is taking place. And that is a problem that will happen that would cause you to have mud if the reverb decay time is too long. So that's why I was explaining that that might be the most important control in the last video. The reason is that if you have a long decay time, then when you play the sound again, then the decay time will still be in the same frequency range, and therefore the new transient or the new sound that is being played will compete with that reverb because they take up the same space. As in the example I was discussing before, where there is a bass that is competing with a kick. So let's look at the solution and what do you do about that. And there will be audio examples, of course. So if we go to Fruity Limiter, it would default to open up showing the limiting section. You click compressor, and what you want to do is you want to switch it to the sidechain where the info is coming from. So in this case, it's the sound still hills. And when I play a note with still hills, this will respond to it. But first, I would explain what I'm looking for. So in Fruity Limiter, when the info populates from the other mixer track, it's going to show up here in blue waves. You lower the threshold below the input peaks that are from the other signal, and they appear in their blue. And then you set the amount of ratio that you want, because that's how much you want to reduce the signal by. You can adjust the release time if the other sound is ducking for too long. So let's say if I had a kick and a bass, and the kick drum, it kicks, then the bass ducks, but the bass ducks for too long after the kick has already finished, then I would adjust the release time and make it lower. So in this case, I do have a pluck sound because that's the kind of sound that Steel Hills is. It kind of sounds like a steel drum. That's why I named it that. So I'm going to set the release time in such a way that the reverb comes back up, because I want the reverb to have an atmospheric sort of presence, as you will see with the audio examples, or even as you've seen, because I'll probably put some before my speech in the editing. So breaking the fourth wall again. What's up, future Ron? Anyway, so I will lower the threshold until I reach the input peaks that are coming from the other signal. I reduce by increasing the ratio. I reduce the sound of the signal that's on this channel, and I'll mess with the knee if I don't like how sharp it is, and I will adjust the release time so that it is ducking for long or short enough. So with that being said, let's actually look at that in practice. I'm going to play some notes. So you can see the blue trace of the notes right here. That's the input from the other one. You can see how much louder the reverb is actually. At the top, you can see the amount that the reverb ducks each time I hit a note. And that's what I wanted to do, because I want for each instance of me playing the note to actually pierce the reverb so you hear that sound. Now let's look at an example of what it sounds like if there's more of a muddy character to it, which, to be honest, in this frequency range you might just want to create some type of soundscape effect. But for the purpose of talking about clarity, because that's what we're talking about, I am not showing that. You could reduce the amount of compression taking place too for a creative effect, but let's just listen to the difference. So turn the effects off. Let's play. So you can hear how when I turn off the effects, it turns off the compression and everything I've done to that reverb. And you can hear how the sound sounds like it's further away almost, and it's kind of like covered up by the reverb sound. But when I reintroduce the effects, including this compressor that's right here, it comes back to the forefront, and it sounds like that sound is in front of the reverb, and the reverb is just behind it, acting almost like an environment. That's the effect that I was going for in this sound for the purpose of this video, to explain clarity when it comes to sidechain compression. But it deals with reverb because the last video was about reverb as well. So keep that in mind. I could decide that I liked it the first way. You know, it sounds a little bit more mysterious. It's unclear, like the sound is compared to the reverb. But I opted to go for clarity because I really like how that sounds. You know, there might be something I'm doing where I want to produce tension. So I play something like this. I'm playing a C diminished 7th chord. That's what I was just playing. And I would want you to hear all of those notes because, well, they're diminished. So naturally, we're going to feel tension because of the interval of minor thirds stacked on top of each other. That's a topic for later whenever I cover music theory. But also, let's say if I did a modulation and I made the sound arrive at a point where it's supposed to relax you again, you know, where the tension that's in there is resolved. So for example, I could leave the mud that was in the signal with no compression, but the way I would think about it is, what if you had a harder time hearing those last notes, like here? Because that's where the tension is resolved, but you can see the further I play while this is passing, the reverb becomes louder because every time I hit a note, more reverb is added. And there's, of course, two reverbs that are playing at the same time. You know, so that's to be considered when you're making a sound that's like that. The reverb is getting louder. So as you play notes that are later, they're going to have a greater risk of being masked. And so that is sidechain compression. If we look here, there were more things I did. I have an EQ and I have neutron 3 elements, and I'll be explaining those things and my choices for the reverb in later videos. But oh, before I forget, I also want to add that I turned down the reverb too, because part of clarity when it comes to reverb is turning it down. So real quick, I'll show you what the difference was before I decided to turn it down. You hear how the reverb is very intrusive, like it's a hallway. You know, I don't want it to really sound like it's a hallway this time, or a bathroom. But when I turn it down, it sounds a lot more clear after I turn it down. And I personally like the way that sounds much better than what it turned up. And I think that's about where I had it before, because that sounds right. Again, just redoing it. But yeah, so turning reverb down also is a key. It's something that you don't really think of, but even when you just consider it logically, to sidechain it also is really turning the reverb down. You just want the overall level to be affected by the mixer track after that, because maybe the total amount of reverb is too loud. So with that being said, that's everything that I had to talk about in this video. And if you saw the whole thing, I thank you. Maybe I'll name this Reverb Part 2. I haven't figured that out yet, but we're continuing the series on clarity in music production. So thank you for watching. Have an awesome day as usual. Peace.